obsession with touch right now and multi-touch, and also a lot of people think it's new, and so everybody's reinventing the wheel, and there's actually a huge history there, and it's actually a pretty interesting history. And so the Macintosh came out in 1984. In that year, we were already building multi-touch interfaces. So that's how old it is. It didn't happen in the last 2 years. And but the touch stuff was starting to happen as early as the 50s. And it was coming out in electronic music and for making touch-sensitive controllers, way before digital and analog controllers. And there was one of my mentors was a guy named Hugh Lacane, Bob Moog and Don Buchla were the inventors of the synthesizer, independently, and all of them at various stages were doing touch-sensitive things, because it's beautiful. You can slide your finger and gesture, it's all this stuff, but it wasn't for display, it was for sound, to articulate the sound and get the nuance and so on. And my group built one of the first multi-touch surfaces, and actually what we were making was a percussion instrument so that you could hit it and get different sounds depending on where you hit it. But like a conga drum, you could put your palm down and drag it to change the pitch. We were just making, and I was making an instrument for a piece I wrote for a percussionist who played in Steve Reich's ensemble, like a guy named Russell Hartenberger. He's on the drumming, the old drumming record. So anyhow, a lot of these things came, and it was about performance, it was about gesture. And then there was lots of other people who came along, and this is what I was talking about. There's at least a 20-year window for these things to evolve. And most people never heard of it. And then all of a sudden, everybody becomes aware of it, and it's the cool new thing. And I'm sort of saying new. My kids are saying that. And then, but to be clear, I'm not saying we invented everything. It's just the concepts were there. Everybody came along and added new stuff, and that was the great thing about it, right? They brought their own perspective. Now, the thing about touch that you realize is that it follows one of my basic rules, that everything's best for something and worst for something else. So, for example, I think probably 50% of the 12-year-old girls in Britain can text under the desk in school without the teacher knowing, eyes free, right?
I agree with that, totally.
And probably I am, on the other hand, and hold a conversation and still listen to music in their iPod, right? Now, the minute you have a purely touch interface, you can't do that anymore. Because you can't touch type on touch, ironically, right? Because that's the whole thing. The mechanical keys, you can use motor memory, and your tactile feedback is where you are. You can feel your way around and then push. But you don't have, see, I study how God, the designer I respect the most is God, so to speak, because of trying to understand the job he did. But he didn't do a perfect job. We don't have perfect motor memory as to where things are in space. And so I can't touch type on a touch screen without looking. And therefore the teacher's going to catch me texting you in the middle of class.
Right.
And therefore all those poor 12-year-old girls have lost out. I can't operate when I'm driving the car if I've got touch. I can't draw with my fingers. That's why sometime after kindergarten I picked up a pencil instead of finger painting. Now sometimes it's still good to finger paint. Sometimes it's good to use a pencil. Anybody who says finger painting's better than pencils without qualifying for what doesn't know what they're talking about. Right?
Yes.
Anybody who says that touchscreens are better than mice doesn't know what they're talking about if they don't qualify. For what? For whom? Under what conditions? And now, convince me, what are you doing? Where are you going to do it? Why? And then maybe I can design you an interface that is optimal for you, but it'll be terrible for you. Right? Maybe. And that's the thing. And so the trick is, don't be a one-trick pony. So I love touch. I've worked in it for 20, 30 years. I'm not a zealot because I've also worked with pen-based stuff. I've worked with key-based things. I've worked with sliders. And the point is when to use them, how to use them. How do they work together? And how do you build applications that will behave well when you do it with touch, but also if you work with a stylus, and so that you don't have to make as many different applications as there are input devices. So that if you have mobile phones, some that have keys, some that have touch, some that have styluses, or some that have all three, most of your work will still behave reasonably. And then there's this layer that will optimize for those types of things, but you don't, if you're a small startup, you don't have to build 10 million different versions of your code. And then maybe you can build stuff that's really good and has a large enough market that you can stay in business to actually get better and better at your craft. And those are the things that interest me. But
It excites you.
Yeah, it excites me.
Yeah.
And the other part is that what's touching? And when people talk about touch, they think about, well, what about, instead of my finger, what if I have touch in my left hand and I'm using a stylus in the right hand for a two-handed input? So it's not multi-touch, it's multi-handed and multi-modality. What does multi refer to, right?
I agree with that.
What if I put objects like my mobile phone? I mean, that's the thing that really excites me of stuff I'm working on, is that when I put my phone on Surface senses the touch, but it also knows it's a phone. And by the way, it knows it's my phone. And then the images and stuff pop out, and if I zoom down, I can move things around. It's who's touching, what's touching. Oh, by the way, if it's fingers, is it my finger or your finger? And because people have made multi-touch systems that can sense not only who that is being touched and where, what fingers, but actually whose finger, yours or mine. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, that gets fun, doesn't it?
And for most people, they'd say, well, who cares? But for, again, everything's best for something versus for something else. For some people, that's really valuable. And so, in a sense, that's what makes my life worth living, is getting to explore that really rich, complex space that's amorphous, hard to understand, but if you're a curious person and you can have the technique and the methodologies to try and make sense of it, the potential to do fantastic design is immense, and we just haven't, we've hardly scratched the surface. After 20 years, right?
You have to open your mind.
Yeah.
Your teams have to open their minds.
Yeah.
So they,
And it's in a sense, that's where I am is because I have a play box where I can try and understand this stuff, and then if I do understand it, I have an outlet for how to make some kind of manifestation of that.
So would you say then that like Microsoft Research is like a think tank in a way? A
Yeah.
group of ideologies and ideas forming what's going to be there in 10 years' time?
Whenever I give a talk, actually it didn't, people sort of say, Microsoft, open source, Microsoft. So you guys aren't open and stuff like that, show your source code. So here's what I'd say that the following thing about, when you think about open software and stuff that's open, here's what's cool about Microsoft Research, and that Microsoft for some reason never talks about this, and they get no credit for it. What would you rather have, open source or open research? The thing about Microsoft Research is that even if you're the youngest, most junior member at the lab, if you have an idea and you want to write about it, here's the clearance policy. Should I write a paper on this, a published paper on this? Yeah, sure. That's it. You don't have to tell your manager. You don't have to ask your manager. You don't have to ask your manager's managers. You don't have to talk to any lawyers. That if you are worthy, good enough at your craft to work there, then damn it, you're mature enough to make your own decisions about that stuff. And nobody makes it for you. And that is one of the most fundamental principles of that place. And it's one of the best computer science labs, and I use that term loosely because it's full of psychologists, anthropologists, designers, and stuff like that. But that it is open in terms of the individual contributor's ability to decide what they do about their work. And so when you ask me about Microsoft Research, that's why I love it. I have more academic freedom there than I did when I was at a university. I'm still a professor, but there I'm having to worry about, you know, patents, IP, and who I can talk to, because the university's trying to do that. And MSR has a very different approach. And the thing is, if we're trying to push, not to say how are we going to do next quarter, how are we going to do in the next 20 years? The really frightening thing is how few companies are investing in ideas that are 20 years out. And so when you have really bright people who finish their PhD, who want to do research with a capital R and let their minds completely go, where are they going to go? And there's hardly any places left. Xerox PARC is a shadow of its former self. IBM labs, they're still there, but they're way smaller, and it's really depressing. And the thing is that the other part that's wonderful about it is that the history of computer science is there. There's this guy, Butler Lampson, who worked on the Alto. Guy Gary Starkweather invented laser printers. Chuck Thacker built the Alto in 3 months, I might add, and they're all down the hall. Gordon Bell, who was at Lincoln Labs and was the head of DEC and stuff like that. The history of computer science is there, and so you have a question. You can just walk down the hall, and you don't have to go to the library. The people who wrote the books in the library are down there, right? And Jim Blinn, or Jim Kachia, Turner Whitehead, who invented ray tracing, all these heroes of computer graphics, and that's what makes it. And then there's, they're actually not the smart ones. We're too old to be smart. We're just walking things of history.
I find it really interesting that you were bringing up sort of Google, iPhone, all those elements, and how you're learning from them, and you're moving on from them, and you're not trying to compete against them. You're trying to advance from them in a way.
Yeah. I'd say I am trying to compete with them, but I'm not trying to copy them.
Exactly.
And I think but maybe copy some of the values. But just think about it in terms of sports. It's if you play football, I mean, what satisfaction would you get beating some third division team if you were Manchester United? Right? So if you want to beat the Spurs, or you want to beat Barcelona, right? and the people you want to beat the most are the ones you most respect, because what is it? And so I view that when I look at other designers who work for other companies, many of them are my friends, and the ones that aren't, I really hugely respect them. And it's like we push each other, and I think companies do that. And that's the one aspect, I think, of the free market and competitiveness that really helps things go. And I also think it's fascinating if you just look at think about anybody who's interested in doing something new in experience design. What satisfaction they must get from the example of the Wii, in terms of the smallest player took this chance, but also notice it wasn't the idea, it was the management that had the courage to take the risk to fundamentally change the orientation of the company from the hardcore gamers that dominated the industry to the rest of us. And that lesson can come to anybody in management, to realize there can be rewards, but risks, but you can contain the risks. And then the question is, how do you train yourself to manage risk? And I think I'm a mountaineer of sorts, not a great one, but when I climb a waterfall, for most people it would be suicide, but actually in a couple of days, if you're reasonably fit, you could learn to do that in terms of knowing right tools, right fitness, right technology, right partners, and right conditions, and all of a sudden this thing that would otherwise be suicidal can be rendered within acceptable risk. And business the same way. You can learn those same things if you understand what the tools are, what the partners are, how to judge those things. And the reality is, the most dangerous thing is to take no risk at all and play it safe, because then you will die, but it'll just be a long, slow death. And,
Instead of going out on a gym.
yeah, if you're going to go.
Off that mountain.
Yeah, that's right. At least you'll have an adrenaline rush. You have a smile on your face.
And it's great to meet somebody that's preaching design right up there in the whole cycle, because I've been a designer all my life, and from being a fine artist, and I agree design is key if it's a part of all the sportive elements, of course.
Yeah. It's hysterical. Just when someone like Steve Ballmer's going around talking, or Bill Gates are talking about the parts of design, I'm just sort of sitting there. Nobody 10 years ago would have thought that would happen, and all of a sudden it's like they found religion and they love it, and they're so excited and curious. It's great.
It's great.